Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorvik, and as you can see in the video, in the edit, this is a completely new and different format. It's also labeled differently. So welcome to my inaugural episode of my new web series called Fandom Friendly. This is more of like a talk show, more of a podcast style web series where I will be covering a lot of different topics. I don't know if I want this to be more of a weekly show or a bi-weekly show, once a month type of show. I think for now I want to keep it at a weekly show, see how it does. But again, this is more of a topic that talks about a wide variety of different pop culture topics such as movies, TV, music, maybe even some video game stuff. I mean, I want to, work my way towards that. And I thought for this episode, I will continue my MCU phase ranking videos. And the reason why I chose to do it this way and not just in its like separate video like phase 1 and phase 2 is because there's 11 movies here. Okay, in phase 3 they really jumped and did double the output of the last two phases. And I thought if I wanted to give each movie its fair share of, talking about them and etc., it would have to be a really long video. And I thought doing a more podcast style video, doing phase 3, phase 4, and then eventually phase 5, I think will be a lot better. So if you like this new format, please let me know. And I will do a separate video talking deeper about Fandom Friendly and what my real plans are for it. For now, we are just going to focus on rankings. So let's go ahead and get into it. As you can see here, I already have it pulled up. If you haven't seen my phase 1 or phase 2 rankings, spoiler, you know where I put these films. And I know a lot of these placements are probably controversial. I mean, I haven't got any pushback yet, but then again, I'm a small channel. I don't get a lot of views on my videos anyway, but on the off chance that these videos somehow, blow up, then I know that I will get pushback on a lot of these. If this is your first time seeing me, I am a filmmaker. I don't work in the Hollywood, like the main Hollywood industry. I do a lot of independent work, but I've taken a step back the last couple years, and I'm just now easing myself back into it. So I look at these films from a filmmaking perspective, the acting, the action, CG, the score, and of course I throw some of my personal feelings in there as well, which is why you see some of these like crazy rankings like Avengers Age of Ultron above Iron Man. And I know, especially when we get to phases 4 and 5, and maybe even a couple of movies here in phase 3, I know I will definitely get a lot of pushback, but I don't really care. Again, these are my opinions. You can agree with them, or you don't have to agree with them. It's not really that big of a deal, to me at least. So let's go ahead and get into this. Enough yip yap. There will be chapters in the description, so if you want to go to a particular movie, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're going to be starting off strong here. As you can see, again, if you haven't seen part 1, part 2, these are my tiers. I have Excelsior, which is the S tier. These are the movies that I think they just can't be beat in one way or the other. Of course, my A tier is I Love You 3000, which are movies that I think everyone generally likes in a way, but they are just also very solid MCU films. And then my B tier is I Still Believe in Heroes. And these are the movies that a lot of people, I don't think, give enough credit to. And there will be a lot in this tier as well. My next one is I'm Still Worthy. These are films or TV shows that are, a little bit subpar. Maybe there were some things that were missed about them, or maybe some people just didn't really latch on to them in a way that Marvel hoped they would. But I still think that they are good, filmmaking wise. I think they are still good projects that I think people should give more than one look at, and that is, of course, I'm Still Worthy. And then, of course, we have our F tier, and that is I'm Sorry, Little One. And right now, there's only really one project I think that belongs in this tier, And I'm sure everyone can guess what that is. But again, we will talk about that when we get there. So, again, let's go ahead and get into this. Phase 3, I think, really started off strong. I mean, so this started in 2016. I think after the semi-success of Avengers Age of Ultron and even Ant-Man in a way, Marvel was really hitting their stride. And of course, we started off with Captain America 3 Civil War. This was also directed by Joe and Anthony Russo. I mentioned that in the last video. And of course, they'll go on to direct Infinity War and Endgame. And then now they'll be going on to do Doomsday and Secret Wars. But for me, I think this movie, a lot of people call it Avengers 2.5. In a lot of ways it is. We saw the seeds of this movie planted in Age of Ultron. And of course, we saw it planted in Avengers as well, because a lot of those events get called back in this film. But we also see the introduction of some new characters and some old returning characters to the MCU, such as Thunderbolt Ross, who at the time was played by William Hurt, who of course showed up in The Incredible Hulk. We open up with the new team Avengers, which is Captain America, Falcon, Black Widow, Scarlet Witch, Rhodey, War Machine is part of that team as well, but he wasn't in the opening. But I think all in all, I think this really gave some action, and just like previous films, it helped sprinkle in and builds out the world a little bit more. Now we have Rumlow returning, Frank Grillo's character from Winter Soldier, as Crossbones. It's kind of upsetting that he dies in the beginning of this. I really wish, they keep some of these smaller villains as kind of like mainstay in the MCU, just to give our heroes something to fight on a daily basis. But we open up with this great set piece of the Avengers fighting Rumlow and his team and stopping them from releasing and stealing a deadly virus. Of course, this ends in tragedy, which kicks off the events of the film. And of course, if you've seen this movie, you know the story. There is the incident. The world, like the United Nations, calls for the regulation of the Avengers, because they are, super powered, enhanced individuals that just freely go wherever they want, ignoring sovereign borders and just imputing their will on people, whether or not they want to be saved. And this theme has been addressed before. We saw it in Batman versus Superman, where this theme of, if they're superpowered people, do they have the right to save people? Do those people want to be saved? It's something we also saw in The Incredibles. Mr. Incredible saves someone, and then, other people gets injured because they're saved. There's collateral damage. I mean, this is something that that politics in these worlds have to address in a way. Like I mentioned, there were new characters introduced here. This was the first time we saw Chadwick Boseman portray his character, T'Challa, also known as Black Panther. I mean, this was a huge deal at the time because Black Panther is one of those characters that is a staple for the Avengers. Obviously, he's not a founding member, which is fine, but he's someone who's always there. And of course, we'll get to Black Panther's movie later on in the video. This was another huge movie because we also got Spider-Man. During this time, 2 years prior to this, you had Sony's The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield. It was The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And it didn't really do so well in theaters, I believe. And then this is the time where Sony got hacked by, allegedly by North Korea, and they released a bunch of things, and Sony needed to play, and so they negotiated with Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios to get Spider-Man in this deal. And then of course, I should do a whole Fandom Friendly just on the Spider-Man saga alone, because there is a lot of history there that I don't really want to dive into this. But needless to say, we got Spider-Man, and of course we got Tom Holland to play Peter Parker. And what else to say about this film was that the action is incredible. I really like the story. The villain, we got Baron Zemo. Of course, he didn't have his iconic purple mask. We wouldn't see that until Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But I still think that there is a lot that he does in this movie that, you kind of have to give your disbelief. Like, a lot of things had to fall in line for his plan to work. But at the end of the day, it did. And the Avengers broke up. And of course, this is a film that also sets up Infinity War and Endgame, because the Avengers get divided in this movie. They're not there for each other, and this is why they lose in Infinity War, and it's something that's called back in Endgame, but we'll talk more about that later. But even though this movie was very crowded with literally everyone, it's still at the end of the day a Captain America story. We focus a lot on him and his relationship with Bucky, and Bucky's relationship with the Winter Soldier program, and how he killed Tony Stark's parents, and so on and so on. I mean, there's just so much that's packed into this film that I really have to give credit to the writers and the directors of this film. Just the cinematography, the score. I mean, the score that's playing during the airport scene, it feels like this tragic, heartbreaking, just Avengers theme. I do think if they did like the Avengers theme, but like in a minor key, maybe it would have worked out. I don't know. I'm sure another independent composer has done that. But again, at the end of the day, I mean, it's super impactful. Now, for me, I'm a huge Captain America stan. I've said it before in the previous videos, and I said it in my Captain America Brave New World reaction trailer, that I just love these characters, and I'm really glad that the MCU as a whole has made these characters better. And they've gotten better in the comics as well. I like I said, I'm reading through Sam's run as Captain America right now, but I really do think Civil War is just one of those films that, for anyone who hasn't seen these movies, I think this is a great movie to show them. Even though, one, it's third in a trilogy, and it's sort of in the middle of the Infinity Saga, I still think it's a great introduction to what peak Marvel can be. And for that, I feel like that I have to place this at a very, very high I Love You 3000. It's not S tier. I mean, I think Winter Soldier's better, because Winter Soldier's a little bit more contained, but I think Civil War is probably one of the best, in top 5 for sure, Marvel films. Okay, moving on to another origin film, and that is Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange is one of those characters that, growing up, I sort of knew about. I mean, obviously, I didn't read any of his comics. I was more of an Ultimate Spider-Man kind of guy, personally. But I was still very aware of him, and they even talks of bringing him in very early on in the Infinity Saga, but he found his place in Phase 3, which is where we are now. So this film came out also in 2016. I believe it came out later that fall, probably like November, I believe. And this movie kind of is happening at the same time as parts of it at least are happening at the same time as Civil War. But we get introduced to Benedict Cumberbatch as the titular character, Doctor Strange. We go through his origin, his car wreck, his arrogance, his trip to Carmitage, his introduction to Wong. We get introduced to Caecilius, who I do think is a weak villain, but it being Mads Mikkelsen, the way that he portrays that character is just unparalleled. Like, I don't think you could have casted a better person for that particular character. Of course, we also get Dormammu as kind of the big bad, but he hasn't really showed up again, because he's one of those like cosmic, like otherworldly, dimensional, villains that seems impossible to stop, but somehow Doctor Strange did it by obviously using the Time Stone. And I should mention that this is the next film to introduce an Infinity Stone. Like I mentioned in the first 2 videos, we had technically Iron Man 2 is the first appearance of an Infinity Stone. We see a picture of the Tesseract, but obviously we wouldn't see it until Captain America as the first official appearance of the Tesseract. And then of course Avengers, I do include the Mind Stone in there, although we didn't know it was the Mind Stone at the time. But of course the Mind Stone wouldn't fully show up until Avengers Age of Ultron. I think I forgot to mention this in Phase 2 video, but Guardians of the Galaxy was also the first appearance of the Power Stone. So at this point, we are up to 4 Infinity Stones. And as we locked into this in the real world, everyone knew, okay, where are the rest? Where's the souls? Because at this point in time, we also had Thor the Dark World that also introduced the Reality Stone. So we were up to 5 Infinity Stones. And for a long time, no one knew where the Soul Stone was. Of course, we won't find out until Infinity War. But again, I do think the visuals of this movie are pretty incredible. I mean, even now, like some of the work that the visual effects artists did with, you know, all these buildings shifting and like things being upside down and like the mirror dimension, and how, you know, the science of it all, of explaining that magic is by manipulating light fractals. I mean, there's just so much that gets introduced to this. And technically speaking, this is the first time we get introduced to the multiverse with these different dimensions and everything, when, you know, Doctor Strange goes through his, you know, acid trip. And I do think the supporting cast is really great in this. You have Benedict Wong as Wong, who is still a staple in the MCU today. Of course, you had Rachel McAdams as Christine Palmer, Night Nurse. And I really just like their chemistry together, her and Benedict Cumberbatch's chemistry together. It's just a love that feels really real. I mean, I just don't know how to explain it. I mean, we see more of it in Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. But the love that they have for each other, and like the friendship they have as well, it just feels so real, and I really like, you know, when actors can really portray that. But all in all, I mean, I think this is a very solid film. I think this film gets overlooked a lot because it is an origin film that came late in the game, and of course we still have a few more origin films in this phase. But I think a lot of people do sort of sleep on this movie for that, with the mix of Caecilius being a good but sort of weak villain, you know, a forgettable villain, I should say. I do think more people should give this film a chance and really go back and watch it as truly one of the better origin films. And for that, I'm going to place it in the B tier. I Still Believe in Heroes. I'm going to place it right above Ant-Man. Alright, moving on. So James Gunn is back, baby, with Guardians Volume 2. Chronologically takes place a few months, I believe, after the first one, so we pick up right back with the game. We have Baby Groot, you know, we have, you know, they're more of a team, you know, we have a pretty cool opening, and again, like, the soundtrack in this is really good. I did mention in the Phase 2 video that I think Guardians 1 has the classic soundtrack that everyone knows, and I think Guardians 2 also has a good soundtrack, but it's very forgettable. I mean, the only song that I really like listen to regularly from this is Mr. Blue Sky. I don't know what it is. It's the opening song. It's just a great song you can just vibe with on just a nice, bright, sunny day. I love blasting it in the car. And then, of course, Guardians 3, I think, has the best soundtrack, but we'll talk more about that when we get there. But all in all, you know, we continue the evolution of the Guardians, Peter Quill, Gamora, Drax, Rocket, and of course Groot, who, like I mentioned, is now Baby Groot. And then we get introduced to a new Guardian, Mantis. I think the thing I like most about this film is that it feels like it's still Peter's story, you know, in a way, much like the first one. But, you know, this family is already found, but now he's reunited with his father, who we learn is Ego, the Living Planet, played by Kurt Russell, which is just a crazy villain to have, I think. But in a ways, I think James Gunn made him work. I mean that's what's great about James Gunn, is that he could take these D-list, E-list, F-list characters and, you know, spin them around and turn them into these lovable, you know, just misfits of characters. I mean, look at the Suicide Squad. I mean, how many of you actually knew who Ratcatcher 2 was, you know? But after that movie, you just love her. And like, and that's what I'm talking about with no one. I mean, that's not true. People give James Gunn credit, but of course there's been a lot of pushback recently. But again, I'm digressing. That's a topic for a different day. But we see a lot of improvements. In this movie, we get introduced to just more of the cosmic side of Marvel. I mean, nothing really too crazy happens in this film, besides introducing a few new characters. We got Starhawk, who is played by Sylvester Stallone. We also get more backstory on Yondu and why he didn't deliver Peter to Ego. And all around, there's just still these elements of, this whole found family thing and sacrifice. Of course, in this film, Yondu sacrifices his life for Peter's during the final battle. And it's a very impactful scene, and it's something like still watching that scene where all of the Ravagers come and they support Yondu and how he stopped Ego and all this kind of stuff like that. I mean, it still, chokes me up a little bit. I have to be honest. I don't think it's as good as the first one. I do think Volume 2 is probably the weakest out of the 3 Guardian films by a long shot. But, it's still a movie I somewhat enjoy. I mean, looking at it from just pure entertainment value, I think it's my least watched Guardians film. I think I've seen probably Guardians 3 more than both Guardians 1 and 2 combined. So for that, and just with Ego, the visuals were really good in this film as well. Just space. I just love space. Obviously, you can tell from the background and from the logo of Fandom Friendly. I'm a huge space guy as well. And just some of that imagery when they're flying through space, when they're warping through space. I mean, it really sparks the imagination, and that's something that I can really appreciate. So for that alone, I think I'm going to keep this, and I still believe in Heroes, but I'm going to place it right above. This is a tough one for me. I think I enjoy Ant-Man more, but obviously I think it's unfair to compare them because they are 2 very different movies. But I think for now I'm going to keep it right below Doctor Strange, and I still believe in Heroes. All right. Moving on to our first Spider-Man films, came out in 2017, and that's Spider-Man Homecoming. This was directed by John Watts. He actually did all 3 Spider-Man films, and he's also one of the directors of Skeleton Crew, the new Star Wars show that I reacted to on the channel. I forgot to mention that reaction because I was just blown away by the look of that show. But what to say about this film? I think it's a really good Spider-Man film. I know a lot of people don't really. I say a lot of people. I think it's a loud minority of people just don't like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. They're either Tobey Maguire stans or they're Andrew Garfield stans. Don't get me wrong. I think each of the Spider-Men are good in their own different ways, and of course we'll talk more. I think I'll talk more about that when we get to Not Far From Home. What's the third one called? No Way Home. When we get to No Way Home, I will dive more into that. But for here, I will say that I think Tobey Maguire is a good Peter Parker. I think Andrew Garfield is a good Spider-Man, and I think Tom Holland is a great mix of both of them in good ways. But here, one of the big characters is Iron Man, who's in this. And I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, that a lot of people just don't like how Spider-Man is so heavily tied to Iron Man. And I think people got to remember, I mentioned this, it might have been in my last video when I was talking about Age of Ultron and how people were pushing back against Marvel because Tony is the one who created Ultron and not Hank Pym. But Tony is such an integral part, a core mechanic, if you will, an anchor being, if you will, in the MCU, that it just makes sense that he would take, young, like a Peter Parker as, a protege and as someone that he can mold into the next generation of heroes. And it's something that we see more in Far From Home with the legacy of Iron Man, because that movie takes place after Endgame. But in here, we really see the beginnings of that. We see the beginnings of Vulture and how played by Michael Keaton, and I think this is one of the best MCU villains. Just overall. Because, like, that scene where he figures out that Peter is, when they're driving in the car and he figures out that Peter is Spider-Man, and when the light's red and then it turns green, where he's like, oh, really? You know, like, it's just such a great scene in that car. I think that's the best scene in the whole film, I'm going to be honest. But this is also the first time that we really see Peter Parker in high school, because in the comics, you know, I think he starts off at like 14 or 15 being Spider-Man, and it's just staple in the comments that when, even in Civil War, when he reveal the comic Civil War, where he reveals his identity, you know, it's a big deal that Spider-Man is a kid, you know, and it's something that we saw in Spider-Man 2, you know, when he saves the train and they're like, oh, he's just a kid, even though he's a 30-year-old man. Back to what I was saying, I don't think having Iron Man as this sort of anchor point in this film and as his point of contact is necessarily a bad thing. Is it distracting sometimes? Yeah, but this is also a world full of heroes. Like, if you read the comic books, like, when I was reading Ultimate Spider-Man growing up, you know, there's a whole episode there's a whole issue, or there's a few issues where Spider-Man's with the X-Men, or he runs into Iron Man. You mean, like, you know, you would expect that if there's a bunch of heroes running around New York, especially, they're going to run into each other. You know, it's just the added fact that Iron Man is more of a, you know, father figure to Peter. I think is a really good dynamic, and it's something that prepares Tony for his own child, Morgan, in Endgame. The supporting cast, I think, is great too. I mean, I do like Zendaya as MJ, and I'm really glad that MJ, this might be controversial, but, like, I just don't like MJ, and I mean, like, Mary Jane Watson MJ. Obviously, her name is Michelle Williams in this. She just goes by MJ, so she's not actually Mary Jane. And I think I saw rumors that there might actually be a Mary Jane in the new trilogy, but I really hope not. I want Gwen Stacy back. That's what I loved about the Amazing Spider-Man films, is that I just love their chemistry. I love Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's chemistry, because I think they were dating at the time, which is why it felt so real. And again, I like when actors can portray real relationships. Again, nothing against Zendaya. I think she kills it in all three of these movies. And same thing with Jacob Batalon as Ned. I mean, I just love the dynamic between them, and they just feel like, you know, real best bros. I love that. Again, there's some pretty good action scenes in this. I think the scene with the Washington Monument, where the elevator is crashing down, I think is pretty good. Obviously, the final battle, I think not the final battle, I think the first interaction with Vulture is also pretty good, and it's just nice to see, you know, more street level stuff, when I hope we get more of that. Overall, I do think that this is a very solid Spider-Man film. I mean, it's just fun to watch, I think, in my opinion, and I think I've seen it more than Far From Home and No Way Home. Oh, and we haven't even talked about one of the best parts in this, and that's Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. First of all, nice. Second of all, we did meet her in Civil War when we met, you know, Peter Parker for the first time. But I think she's great in this film, and she's great, and she's not really in Far From Home, so it's kind of hard. But obviously, No Way Home, you know, very impactful. You know, we'll talk more about that later. But I do think she's a great Aunt May for this era, like, truthfully. So for that, I think I will place Spider-Man up here along with Civil War and Guardians. I do think it's a better film, Guardians, but I don't think it's better than Civil War, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to keep that in I Love You 3000. Okay, moving on to Thor Ragnarok. This is the third installment of the Thor franchise. Now, tonally, this was a completely different film, and I think that's why a lot of people really resonated and really speak highly of this film. It was written and directed by Taika Waititi, who I think is just a great comedic actor and writer as well. And he took Thor to a more cosmic place. I mean, we were on which I really appreciate. Of course, Tom Hiddleston returns as Loki in this. We find out that he has been masquerading as Odin for the last few years in timeline from the end of Thor: The Dark World. This is also semi-adapts Planet Hulk, because we also find out that somehow Bruce Banner Hulk ended up on the planet Sakaar, where he fights as a gladiator in the Grandmaster Contest of Champions. And you can see the Grandmaster, who is brilliantly portrayed by Jeff Goldblum. It's just this wacky character. I mean, I really love him. He's considered an elder of the universe. He's also brothers to the Collector, who was played by Benicio del Toro. I didn't really talk about him in the first Guardian, in the Phase 2 video, but they are technically brothers in the the comics and stuff like that. But obviously, the main villain of this is Hela, Thor's older sister, as portrayed by the brilliant Cate Blanchett. And this is what I like about this film. It's like, yes, technically she was there the whole time, but we learn from Odin, who they find on the cliffs of Norway, which is also another great scene. And I'm really glad they changed it, because originally they were going to be in New York, which we do see in the film, but we realize that that Odin was not placed in a retirement home. Or he was placed in a retirement home in New York, but now he is in Norway somehow. And of course, upon his death, Hela is released from Hell, which in Norse mythology is just the underworld. It's not really like hell, like the Christian hell, where you're tortured and damned forever. Hell is literally just the afterlife, nothing crazy. I think the thing that I really kind of dislike about this film is the way that they handled not only the Warriors 3, but I think just Asgard as a whole, as well as the Executioner, who is kind of a tertiary villain, played by Karl Urban. I mean, a lot of it is played for jokes, and I know, like, especially when we get to Love and Thunder, like, just Thor being a joke, which I disagree with, but we'll talk about it when we get there. It did feel very just quick, that she just eliminates basically all of Asgard and the Warriors 3, and just, it just feels very disingenuous to those characters. And I think that seems to be the general consensus with a lot of, like, hardcore, comic book, movie fans when it comes to Thor Ragnarok. I think that is the weakest point of the film. But I think Hela as a villain, again, she's one of those that I kind of wish was still around. I wish that maybe if Hela was maybe banished again, and she somehow returned in Love and Thunder, or she somehow returns in Secret Wars or something. Like, I just wish she was still around, because she was so great. So great. I love Cate Blanchett. And obviously the whole, we also get introduced to Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie, who is another character for the comics. And again, I really just love her character. We see her a little bit in Endgame, but obviously she gets more to do in Thor: Love and Thunder. But in here, as an introduction, as the last Valkyrie, after Hela wiped out the rest of them, I mean, it is just one of those tragic characters, And of course, we have Mark Ruffalo back as the Hulk. Like I mentioned, he has been on Sakaar this whole time for 2 years, I think they said, and he's been Hulk for those 2 years. So it was really nice to kind of like see this kind of buddy team up movie between Thor and Hulk, because of their rivalry in the films and also the times that they spar in the comics. But overall, I mean, I do really like this film. Again, it was a huge tonal shift for Thor, from Thor 1 and Thor 2, it being kind of like those dark, moody, but here he's allowed to be funny. He's allowed to be more of a carefree guy in a way that really serves the growth of his character, which we'll talk more about when we get to Infinity War and Endgame here pretty soon. But I think overall this film is really, really good, and I think it is the best Thor film, and I think that seems to be the general consensus. Do I think it's S tier? No, but I do think it is A tier, so I am gonna put it right up here next to Guardians and above Age of Ultron and I Love You 3000. Again, I do think it's a very solid film. It's probably a film, one of my most rewatched films for sure. And I think it's a general consensus that a lot of people do like this film. Alright, so now we're moving on to, I want to say it's a historic film, and in ways it kind of is, but that is Black Panther. There is so much that I could talk about this. There's only so much I can say about this film. One, we get Chadwick Boseman returning as T'Challa. Of course, this is the only solo Black Panther film that he will do, unfortunately. But also just a stacked cast. I mean, you had Peter Nyong'o, you had Letitia Wright as Shuri, you had freaking Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. I mean, you just Winston Duke as M'Baku. I mean, there's just so many great characters and actors in this film. Obviously, we can't forget about Angela Bassett as Queen Rwanda. I mean, just stellar. Obviously, this film was directed by Ryan Coogler, who this was more of a passion project for him. I mean, you can really feel it when you're watching this movie. I mean, the work that went into the pre-production work alone that went into this film, with the costume design, with the language, coming from, I'm not gonna say it, but I'll put it here. It's the language with the clicks in it. And mixing that in with other like regional dialects. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And let's talk about Wakanda as well before we really dive into this. I mean, that first scene, the Ludwig Göransson score is also just another iconic score in the MCU. I mean, the MCU is not really known for their iconic scores, not like Star Wars or Harry Potter or even like films of like the 80s and 90s, but I think there is a lot of great scores. Obviously, the Avengers, Captain America: Civil War, Thor, Ant-Man. But I think this was the first truly iconic score. I mean, that the dun 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 dun, and then you hear the do 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 do. I mean, I can't even replicate it. I mean, and then when we finally fly into Wakanda, we see this Afrofuturism, just city of just beautiful architecture and colors, and it's so vibrant. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And of course, at the time of filming this, Chadwick was suffering from the cancer that he had, but you can't even tell. I mean, he hit it so well that not even the producers, I don't even think Kevin Feige might have known, but like allegedly no one knew that he was sick and suffering from this. And it's just something that, watching this movie now, you just feel sad because, how differently would Wakanda Forever be? How differently would the future lineup of the Avengers look? I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. And I think having Killmonger, I think this dynamic between Killmonger and T'Challa it just works so well in a way. I mean, obviously you have two great actors portraying these characters, but it's just one of those like villain, hero stories that I feel a lot of people could resonate with. I mean, there is a lot of step siblings out there, the estranged family members that people deal with. So it's just one of those things. I think the big drawback for this film is that it's just it's an origin film, and it's an origin film that's so late in the game when it comes to the Infinity Saga, at least. And don't worry, we have one more origin film we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But I think the one thing that draws back is that it suffers that Marvel hero villain thing where the villain is just an evil version of the hero, and I think that's where this film suffers for me. And even some of the CGI work in that final fight is also pretty rough. I mean, they're just 100% CG fights. But overall, I feel like I can overlook that a little bit because, I mean, there is a lot to the story of them tracking down Ulysses Claw. I didn't mention this in my Phase 2 video, but he was also introduced in Age of Ultron. In here, I feel like he's more of a threat. But again, he's like a C-list villain that I wish was still around because he does get killed in this movie, and he's just also played by Andy Serkis, and you just throw that character away. Like, it's crazy. Like, it is kind of bonkers how Marvel just kills so many good like B and C-list villains that can be continuous problem in the MCU. But overall, I think the performances in this movie are just incredible. I mean, everyone just A-game, and even more so in Wakanda Forever when we get to that next video. But obviously they just just knock it out of the park. And again, like, some of the CGI is spotty, but there's also spots where the CGI is just, it's great, and from a technical standpoint, I mean, the production value, design, like, just really shines, I think. And so you really have to give it to the crew of this film that really, put this film together, because without them, I mean, this film could have looked really bad. I still think it's one of the better Marvel movies, and for that, I don't think it's S tier, but I do think it is a high I Love You 3000, and I'm actually going to put it above Guardians as the number third spot up here, just under Spider-Man. Again, I feel like it's not fair. Probably people will probably rank it higher, which is fine. But again, like Spider-Man and Black Panther and like Civil War, I think these movies really tie into each other, because not only, Civil War introduced not only Spider-Man but Black Panther, but they also follow shortly after. So I think these films watched together really kind of paint the picture of, you know, where these heroes stand in these debates, because Black Panther takes place like a couple weeks after Civil War in the timeline, so it's something that you definitely can watch directly after Civil War and be like, oh, okay, I dig that. So yeah, so for me, I keep those three movies close because again, I feel like they do tie into each other in a lot of ways. Okay, so I'm going to change it up a bit. I have been going through release order for all of these, but I'm actually, as you can see down here, the next film technically is Infinity War. But for Infinity War and Endgame, I'm actually going to save for the last. So I'm going to, even though Spider-Man as well technically takes place after Endgame, I'm also going to rank that first before I do those three films. So notes, we're going to the sequel to 2015's Ant-Man, and that is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Something that I haven't been doing in these videos is talking about like the end credit scenes, because I feel like they're not really important because they just set up the next movie I'm going to be talking about. But Ant-Man did tease that Hope was going to get her own costume as the Wasp, and of course we see that here. So obviously this film takes place, I believe, 2 years after Civil War, because Scott is under house arrest for being on Captain America's team. And obviously during this time, Hank Pym and Hope have been sort of MIA from this, but they are also on the run because they are directly tied to Scott. But I think this film, I think this film is pretty forgettable for a lot of people, because there is a lot that happens, but at the same time there's a lot that doesn't happen. And I think that's the big drawback of this film, is that the scope of it doesn't feel like big, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like, I mean, the main plot of this film is that when at the end of Ant-Man, and during the final fight with Yellow Jacket, they go into the quantum realm. And we learn that when he's in the quantum realm, he gets entangled with Janet, who we learn is also went into the subatomic to stop a missile back in the 80s, which is something that we learned in Ant-Man 1. But she is entangled with Scott, so they're able to communicate with her in a way. And now the main plot of the movie is to go to the quantum realm again and extract Janet. And the main villain of this film is Ghost, who Ava Starr, who is played by Hannah John Kamen, who is returning in Thunderbolts, so that's pretty cool. Now, I think originally, you could have skipped this film in preparation for Infinity War and Endgame, because obviously Ant-Man wasn't in Infinity War, but at the end of this movie is how he gets stuck in the quantum realm again, and how he returns in Endgame 5 years later, which we'll talk more about when we get there. But still, I think it's one of those films that a lot of people, like, you can skip this film and be completely fine. And I think that's unfortunate, but I think this film is definitely pretty weak. And that's nothing against, like, Paul Rudd and the rest of the gang. It's just, I just think the story was just really, really just boring, I think. And I think that's what's upsetting about this, is like, don't get me wrong, there are very cool action set pieces in this. They're very, funny jokes. Like, I think that the chase scene where through San Francisco, where they're just shrinking cars and, they're driving like their little like a Hot Wheels car, I think is pretty cool. And like, the scene where, he's Giant Man and like the the Bay of San Francisco and like all that kind of stuff like that. Like I think there are cool set pieces in this. It's just so unforgettable, and it's just so unfortunate. Like I couldn't even tell you what happens in this film because I haven't seen it in a while, I want to be honest, but I couldn't even tell you what happens in this film besides that car chase scene and like the ending. you know like it's sad. Even Ghost, like I think Ghost as a concept is a really cool character because I think I mentioned it in probably the last video, but for a lot of these movies it's someone with the hero with the villain and they're the same, but she's just so different and from Ant-Man that, I mean, yeah, she is related to the quantum realm, and we learned how she got her powers because her father, who was Dr. Egghead, by the way, Elias Starr, I think is his name. There was an accident with like a quantum reactor or whatever, and then she gets blasted. It becomes intangible. But I think that's a cool power. I mean, obviously she can't control it, and so she goes to a new character who we meet, Ben Foster, who is played by Lawrence Fishburne. Great casting, by the way. But we learn that he's actually Goliath, who is another hero from the Marvel Comics. And actually but we learned that he was Goliath back in the 80s with Hank Pym, Ant-Man, and Janet Van Dyne, Wasp. And like the relationship he has with Ava and how he helps her with her condition, like I think is interesting, and I wish was explored more, but it's not, and it's unforgettable. And for that, I still feel like people should give this movie a chance. I mean, but again, it's just one of those things that it is definitely one of the weakest of these films, and for that, I'm gonna place it in C tier. I'm still worthy because I think there is good in this film. There is a lot of good in this film, but there's just so much of it that's just forgettable and unimportant and doesn't really do anything for the growth of the characters and for the universe. I mean, the only thing that's really significant that happens in this is the end credit scene where they go down and they're trying to help Ava with her condition, and Scott is down there, and then Thanos' snap happens, which we'll get to in Infinity War, because technically Infinity War came out before this movie, not chronologically, but release wise. And Janet, Hope, and Hank all get snapped away, leaving Scott in the quantum realm, for his, setting up his return for Endgame. And I think that's really the only significant thing that happens in this film. And it's just really upsetting. And I just want justice for Ant-Man and the Wasp, really. But I still think it's an okay film. I mean, but yes, I'm still worthy. I think it's a proper place for that, in my opinion. Okay, now the next film also came out between Infinity War and Endgame. It's not really related to them except for the end credit scene, so it is its own standalone. It's also the last origin film of the Infinity Saga that happens basically at the end of the Infinity Saga, and that is Captain Marvel. I'm gonna say it right here, and I'm going to say it with chest. I love this movie. Don't get me wrong. There are some negatives about it. There's still so much good in this film that I think a lot of people overlook just because the main character is a woman. I think that's it. Talked a little bit about this in various videos the last few weeks, that I say a lot of people. It's really, again, it's the loud minority just hate these movies and these TV shows because, one, they feature a woman as the main character, or they feature a person of color as the main character. And that's something that is not, being made up. Like, statistically, you can see it. Like, if you look at just box office numbers, if you look at just the way, reviews, I mean, it statistically speaking, your prejudice is showing. And it's so unfair to these actors because, one, I've been a Brie Larson stan since Hoot, okay? So I don't want to hear it from all of these people like, oh, well, you just like her because she's hot. Well, yeah, but also because she's a brilliant and great actress, and I love everything that she's in. Honestly, I think my favorite movie of hers is Unicorn Store. Have you seen Unicorn Store? You should watch it. Honestly, it's really good. Anyways, I'm going to I'm gonna get lost here. Like I said, I've been a Brie Larson stan forever. So when they initially announced this film, I was thrilled because I'm also a huge Captain Marvel fan. And I think a lot of people miss the point of this movie. Again, it is another cosmic movie, although a lot of it takes place on Earth during the 90s, no less. The decade I was born in. Let that sink in. But we see a lot of things in this film. We see Hala, which is the homeworld of the Kree. We also get Skrulls for the first time in the MCU. And technically they've been here the whole time since the 90s. And we also get Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers, my homegirl. Like, it is a big deal. Nick Fury is in this, a younger self. Phil Coulson, for the first time returning since Avengers, returning to the main MCU timeline, because technically Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is like a branched reality, I guess you want to call it. I mean, it's just so great to see these characters again. And yes, we get the origins of the Avengers Protocol, because we learn that because of the events of this film, Nick Fury's like, well, shoot, we're going to need superpowered people. And we know they exist because she exists. So I'm going to start the Avengers Initiative or Protocol, whatever they call it. I think it's Protocol in this movie. But we learn that they get the Avengers name from Carol, and that her Avenger was her call sign in the Air Force, which I think I also resonate with this film a lot because it is heavily tied to the Air Force, and I was in the Air Force Reserves for a couple years, and that's when I mentioned, I think in my first video, the Phase 1 video, that I was so like tied to Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I think specifically because at that time that movie came out, I was preparing to go into the military. But I still love this film because of just like the visuals are great. I think that slow-mo scene where she gets infused with the Tesseract is something that I think is really fascinating, and just visually it just looks cool. I also want to mention that they bring back Project Pegasus, which is what the study of the Tesseract was in S.H.I.E.L.D., and like how it connects to Captain America, the first Avenger. I mean, there's just so much that this movie adds to fill out those kind of shadowy areas of like the 1900s in the MCU, and like I mean it is really really interesting, and I think more people should look at that. Speaking of villains, we get Jorvik, who is the captain of is it Star Force? I think it's Star Force, which is the commando unit for the Kree Empire, which of course Carol gets a part of because he was actually the one who shot her plane down, and basically is the reason why he has powers, or that Carol has powers anyways. And so in the 90, or in I guess in 89 in the timeline is when this accident happens. She gets taken to Hala, and it basically gets brainwashed and becomes Veers, and they get that name because of Carol Danvers, her dog tag. The whatever's left is Veers, the last 4 letters, which interesting. It's whatever. It's a small thing, but I just love the overall. This is also not the first time, but this is another film that was directed by 2 people, 1 woman and 1 man. And I get why people are probably like, oh well, Marvel didn't trust a woman to direct this, so they got also a man to direct this. And I see that criticism, but I think I don't think it's that deep. I think it's just because I think those, actually, I might have to look it up. Hold on. I mean, I think it's just because like those 2 directors, it's Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. Both of them directed those, and I think that's just because they had a great relationship. Just like Anthony and Joe Russo. Obviously, they're brothers, so they have a good relationship. But these 2 people, they're seasoned writers and cinematographers and directors, and so I do think they did a good job with this movie. And also the cinematography is just so good. As a young filmmaker at the time of this coming out, and I was really focusing on my cinematography skills. This is a film that I did study, because the one particular scene that I can think of off the top of my head is when they discover the black box of that downed ship, where they fully learn what happened to Carol on that day. And when she comes out of that cabin, and it's all like the handheld shaky handheld cam, and she's like, who am I don't know who it sounds cringy when I do it, because I'm not an actor anymore, but it's just one of those scenes that, like, I don't get choked up or teary eyed with it, but it's a scene that I study because it's so well acted, it's so well shot, and it's so well colored. I mean, it's just one of those, like, I think MCU scenes, I think that should be studied. Actually, I just got a great idea. I should do a ranking video on scenes in the MCU. Now, that's dumb. But if you want that, let me know. But yeah, but like, the biggest complaint I think I heard about this movie, besides it being led by a woman, is that Carol Danvers is an asshole. You know, she's mean. I'm like, well, yeah. Have you read any of her comics? That's how she is. Like, even I say recently, this was like 10 years ago, probably. But when Civil War II in the comics came out, it was Iron Man versus Captain Marvel. And she was kind of a dickhead in that, honestly. And I think that's something that people seem to forget, like general audiences that don't read comics, or they just see these movies as, like, you know, front facing. Like, they forget that these characters have personalities in the comics, and, you know, these actors' job it is to bring those personalities to the screen. I mean, that's why Robert Downey Jr. works so well. I mean, there's a lot of Tony's history in the comics that hasn't really been explored, but has been hinted at in the films. But nothing like Dark Reign, or, like, if we got, like, Iron Man 3, but it was Dark Reign, that would be insane. But obviously we didn't get that. So yeah, so I think people treat this film very unfairly. And especially when we get to its sequel, The Marvels, that film also gets treated very unfairly. But for me personally, with the cinematography, the visuals, the acting, the makeup, I mean, I do think some of the makeup on the Skrulls looks really good. Especially, we haven't even mentioned this. Ben Mendelsohn is in this as Talos. The first appearance as Talos, because we'll see him again in Far From Home, and of course, you know, later on down the line. But also just great, and I really like that he got to use his native Australian accent for the Skrulls, and it makes it seem like the Skrulls are just Australians, which is really funny. And I think the first initial chase scene where the Skrulls first come to Earth, where Carol first comes to Earth, and they're going through the streets of LA, and, you know, the one of them, I don't know if it's Talos or not. It might be. I can't remember. No, it's not Talos, because they die. You know, where they're changing, and Carol is trying to find them, and it's the old lady on the subway, and she notices that she saw that lady leave the subway, so she just clocks her. Like, and everyone's like, oh crap. You know, I love it. It's just one of those things where, like, it's funny, but, like, obviously, like, it's still a very tense scene for those two characters in the moment, because of, obviously, you know, it's a life or death situation. And it is also kind of interesting to see, like, SHIELD in like a lower capacity, you know, because for a long time SHIELD was, you know, a secret organization. I don't think until Avengers SHIELD really, or really I guess till Iron Man, technically SHIELD really became, you know, the world organization publicly that it is known as. Well, I guess not anymore. But so yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about Captain Marvel and how much I love this film. But for me, I mean, it's not an S tier. I mean, that's the thing about it. I don't think it's S tier. Even if it was, I think I would put it here in Excelsior. Like I said, there are negative things about it. And some of the negative things, I think, are the villains. I think the villains are the weakest point in this, because we learned that Yarnrog's the main villain. But again, he's a forgettable villain. I mean, he's still out there. He still exists, technically. So he's still alive. That's good. But Carol is just so overpowered that she can stomp him, you know? And so it's just one of those things that, you know, I think it does bring this film down. So for that, I am going to put it in I Love You 3000. But for me, I think I'm going to put it right below Guardians, in between Thor Ragnarok. Now, again, this placement will probably give me pushback and controversy, but honestly, I don't care. Like, if you truly hate this film, I want you to give me a very valid reason that maybe I just overlooked because of my rose-tinted glasses. Again, because this movie takes place between Infinity War, or this movie came out between Infinity War and Endgame. There is a tease for Endgame in this, and of course she'll show up in Endgame as well. But this whole time, I mean, it explains why she has been on Earth. She's been out in space this whole time, and, you know, I just hope to see more of her on Earth, because she is, in the comics at one point, the leader of the Avengers, and I hope to actually see that. If not in Doomsday, I hope to see it in Secret Wars at least. Okay, moving on to Spider-Man Far From Home. So technically, this is the epilogue of the Infinity Saga, if you want to call it an epilogue. So this takes place a couple months after Endgame. So Tony is gone, Cap is gone, Natasha obviously gone. The Avengers themselves have split up. You know, they're gone. Actually, this takes place months after. I think the next like year after. So technically, WandaVision already happened. At the same time this is happening, this film is taking place. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is going on, like that whole ordeal. So there's a lot in the universe going on right now. Obviously, we don't know it. This Spider-Man film, again directed by John Watts, just like deals with the aftermath of Endgame, or the blip, because technically this is 5 years after, or you know, they've been gone for 5 years. In this film, we learned that as the name for the in-universe name for, you know, the snap, as we call it, and this deals with Peter dealing with the legacy of Iron Man. You know, he's asked multiple times, as Spider-Man, not as Peter, but like, is he going to be the next Iron Man? Because he has his Iron Spider suit that he got in Infinity War, which, again, you know, I'm doing these out of order. And so he has to deal with that. And I think one of the most powerful scenes is when, you know, towards the beginning, he sees that mural of Iron Man, and he's just like, you know, he's gone, but, you know, what do we do about it? And of course, Happy returns in this. And I think this is where we really see, like, that relationship with Happy and Peter just really grow, because, you know, Happy lost Tony too. Obviously, Happy has more reason to be sad that Tony's gone, but, you know, he sees how Tony treated this kid, and how, you know, he believed in him, and how he trusted him with Edith, you know, drones. Just seeing this young, smart kid, you know, like the scene in the plane, like later on, where like he's after his big confrontation with Mysterio, who we'll talk about in a minute, he sees Tony and Peter, and I think that really helps that relationship with Happy, and of course that gets taken away in No Way Home, but again, we'll talk about that when we get there. But I think initially this film is generally pretty good. I mean, Nick Fury and Maria Hill is in it, so carryover from Infinity War. Obviously, we find out that it's not actually Nick Fury or Maria Hill. It's actually Talos and his wife Soren, who are the Skrulls impersonating Nick Fury. And then, of course, one of the end credit scenes that we learn that Nick Fury is in space, presumably on the Sword base, which again we'll see in WandaVision, but we'll also actually see it in the Marvels. So let's talk about the villain overall, and that is Mysterio. Mysterio is one of those characters that I feel like would have been very hard to translate 15 years ago, because he's so interesting in a way. In truth be told, I don't think they could have casted anyone else other than Jake Gyllenhaal. And I try to think about that, of like what an alternative casting could be. I mean, they could have got, oh gosh, what is his name? Jason Mazzuccas. I think I pronounced his name, but I'll put a picture in the edit. I think he would have been a great alternative casting for Mysterio, but Jake Gyllenhaal he's just on another level. I mean, if you haven't seen like Nightcrawler, Source Code, even I guess Donnie Darko to an extent, I mean, he is just. Or Prisoners. If you haven't seen Prisoners, he's great in that. It's him and Hugh Jackman are in that movie. Great film. It's actually a film by Denis Villeneuve, who did, you know, Dune. But just an outstanding actor that I think he really sells it in this. I mean, like when you first meet him, you're like, oh, I guess Mysterio, they're changing his origins a bit, and that he is, you know, he is going to be a hero in this. And of course, you know, we later find out that he is acting, and like the way that they reveal that everything is fake, and just it's honestly just it's a great reveal, truthfully, and I think they can get away with it because like he is in like a mocap suit, and like he is like wearing like what an actor would wear, and then they would put in visual effects. Like it is kind of meta in that way, and I really appreciate that. But I also like how, you know, they incorporate how he's tied to Stark and how he's tied to Spider-Man in a way. I mean, it's revealed that that Quentin Beck, because in the comics, Quentin Beck is he works in the film industry as like a special effects artist, like a practical special effects artist, and he uses his expertise to create these illusions to fight Spider-Man with and to do crime and etc. But in here, him being the inventor of Barf that we see in all the way back in Civil War, I mean, I think it just makes sense. Again, it's people complaining like, oh well, all of Spider-Man's villains are tied to Iron Man, and it's like, again, yes, of course they are tied to Iron Man because Tony Stark is an anchor being in this universe. And again, it's those things. It's something that doesn't bother me. I think it just bothers a lot of people just cause. And I think that initial fight scene between Spider-Man and Mysterio, where it's just all illusion, and he's like he can't trust. His spider sense is still like developing in a way, and like I think it is really good. Like, I mean, it's probably a little dated now. I haven't watched it recently, but I can just remember that sequence being just. Of course, in this film, the big thing, we also get introduced to the multiverse again in this, and as like a hint towards the coming saga. And it's interesting because looking at it now, Quentin says that he goes, this is Dimension Earth 616. How does he know that? Because technically speaking, for a long time, the MCU was designated as Earth 1999999 in like the grand scheme of things. And Earth 616, it was the comic universe. And then of course there's Earth 1610, which we see in the Spider-Verse movie, but that is the ultimate universe where the ultimates are where the ultimates are. So him calling it Earth 616, it was pretty interesting at the time. And it's actually not the first time we see Earth 616. If you remember, I didn't mention this in part 2, but all the way back in Thor the Dark World, Eric Selvig was in a mental institution. He was writing, like, that's where we see like Nexus Point. We see all of these multiverse terms, and on there he has written Universe 616. So it's not the first time that it's written, but it just goes to show you that how did Quentin Beck know? Actually, no, how did the other guy know? Because he has a guy in his crew, I don't remember what his name is because he's a tertiary character, but he's like the script writer for Mysterio. So he wrote that it was 616. So what does he know? Is he the Beyonder? Oh my gosh. Did I just crack it? And then of course in Multiverse of Madness we also learned that the universe that the Illuminati are in is as Earth 838, and they also designated the main sacred timeline as 616. So that is pretty interesting. I also just remembered that Quentin Beck said that he was from Earth 833. Anyways, I do think that there is tons of good in this film. I mean, there's also still like a kid film. It's also still like a film where Peter's in high school. He's dealing with growing up. He's developing this relationship with MJ. And of course, by the end of it, they're together. We see him travel through Europe, which I think is a pretty fun sequence. But it is kind of crazy that, Tony Stark left these glasses, these controllers to Edith. Even dead, I'm the hero is what that stands for, which I think is, again, really funny. But he left it to Peter, and not like happy, or even just left it at Avengers Campus, locked up in a vault. I mean, there's so much he could have done. Like, it is really interesting. And it's not even the last time we see those drones. I mean, we see them in Multiverse of Madness again, and I wonder if they're semi-tied to Ultron, which I think would be interesting if they ever came back. Either way, I do really enjoy this film. I think it's the least Spider-Man film that I've seen, but it is generally pretty good. But all in all, I think it is a low I Love You 3000 for me. I don't love it as much as some of these other films, but I do think it's probably right here, right under the first Iron Man film. I think that is a good placement for it. Again, I want people to realize that these like all of these films are really good, are good. I think even most most people would agree that most MCU films are a low A, high B at best. Obviously besides a couple. But yeah, I feel comfortable putting it here between Iron Man and Captain America, the first Avenger. I'm going to kind of do these together because I do feel like they are tied together. And that's why I saved them for last. And that is Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Right off the bat, I mean, I could spend an hour just talking about these movies in general, so I'm going to kind of speed run this. So obviously this is the culmination of everything in the Infinity Saga up to this point. I mean, Infinity War brought all the threads together. We had the cosmic threads. It sort of picks up right after Thor Ragnarok. With the opening, because that movie ends with Thanos' ship approaching that Asgardian vessel, and of course this film opens with the destruction of that. I mean, Thanos is just such a strong villain for someone that we barely see. I mean, I forgot to mention this in the Phase 2 video, but the first Guardians film is the first time we see Thanos, like, full in the Josh Brolin, Thanos. And I mean, even in that, like, one scene that he's in, he's, like, menacing and terrifying. But here, he's this complicated villain, who wants to save the universe in his eyes from, destruction in a way. And, of course, that is by collecting all Infinity Stones and snapping his finger to get rid of half of all life. I mean, that's obviously the origin of that is different in the comics. In the comics, Death is a real, like, entity in the comics, and it's actually alluded that she exists in the MCU as well, and because we see a statue of her in Thor: Love and Thunder, which I'll probably talk about more when we get to that movie. So we know that she exists, but the reasoning for Thanos' motivation in the MCU is different from the comics, so I should preface that. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is Thanos' movie, and I think he does have the most screen time. And the second character to have the most screen time is Thor, and I think Thor is equally just as part of this main story as anyone. I think what's really impressive about Infinity War is that it's like they took the first Avengers, which was crazy, pulling together 6 characters from a franchise, but here they're pulling together everyone. I mean, we get Wakanda, we get just all the different lanes of the MCU together. I mean, we get Iron Man with Wong and Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man fighting some of the Black Order in New York. We get threads pulled through from Civil War of, like, Wanda, secretly meeting with Vision, who was on Tony's side in Civil War, and how, like, they kind of just travel around the world together as well. We also pick back up with Steve and Natasha and Sam, and, like, how they're kind of like the secret Avengers, in a way. I mean, and of course the Guardians, and where they find Thor, and, like, how he's the last Asgardian survivor of that ship. In this movie there are deaths. I mean, we actually see the death of Loki. Like, it's not fake this time. Like, he is dead. I mean, obviously he comes back, but that's a variant of Loki. We know that death is confirmed in the Loki TV show, that is the end of that version of Loki. I mean, and to start off that movie killing Loki is crazy, insane. I mean, just the visuals. I mean, every fight scene is purposeful. Every scene is purposeful. I mean, the scene with Doctor Strange and Tony and Spider-Man on the Q ship on their way to Titan. I mean, Doctor Strange and Iron Man just being, like, butting heads, because their egos are too big. I mean, it's just great character dynamics. In a lot of ways, this is the first time a lot of these characters have even interacted with each other. And it was just so refreshing and just so, like, I don't want to say beautiful to see, but it was just really fun to see. I mean, seeing the Avengers arrive in Wakanda for the first time, because Steve knows where it is, because I did in Civil War, that one of the end credit scenes, they moved Bucky to Wakanda, and Bucky is there, and he is part of the fight. I mean, that the two fronts of the war on Earth and on Titan, I think, just a masterclass in one, editing, production design, writing, effects. I mean, there's just so much that goes in to both of those fights that are just incredible. And of course, the big thing is this is the film where we learn where the last Infinity Stone is, the Soul Stone, and it's on a planet called Vormir in the center of the galaxy, or whatever Nebula says. And not only that, it carries over a thread from Captain America, the first Avenger. And if you remember, when Red Skull takes the Tesseract, he gets teleported away somewhere, and we just assumed he's dead, but no, he's the guardian of the Soul Stone, which is a great way to bring that character back in a way that's meaningful, not just for nostalgic purposes. And of course, this is where Gamora dies. Thanos sacrificed his own daughter just to get the stone. It's crazy. It's insanity. Of course, we also get the infamous scene where Doctor Strange is using the time stone to look at all possible futures of the coming conflict, and there's only, out of 14 million in 5 or whatever it is, only one is where the Avengers win. And of course, we know that obviously that ties into Tony being the one to snap and destroying Thanos. I mean, this film is just, it is peak Marvel. It is peak Marvel. I'm doing these at the same time because there's a lot of similarities, but at the time, Thanos wins. And when you saw this film theatrically and he snaps, and that last 2 minutes of everyone blipping away is haunting, because you hear this low clap of a thunder, and something's wrong, and then you just see them, Bucky, Sam, T'Challa, Spider-Man, the Guardians. I mean, all of them just slowly just disappearing, and it is a haunting image. And then it just cuts to black, and then we had to wait an entire year for Endgame, and it what a long year that was. If you again, it's like Avengers, the first Avengers movie. You just had to be there. And obviously these movies didn't come out that long ago, so most of you watching this obviously remembers that time period, but it's still just that year of waiting for Endgame was unbearable. Speaking of Endgame, let's go ahead and talk about that as well. We pick up immediately after the ending of Infinity War. Tony and Nebula are stuck in space because they're the only ones left. Luckily they are saved by Captain Marvel. And I know a lot of people are like, well, how did Captain Marvel know that they were there? If you saw Captain Marvel the movie, one of the end credit scenes, she arrives on Earth and she meets the Avengers. So we can conclude, and also Rocket is on Earth, and Rocket knew that the rest of the team went to Titan to find Thanos. So we can just assume that Rocket told Carol, hey, they were on Titan, search around there, and maybe you can find them, see if they're there. So I'm pretty sure that's how she found them. I mean, use your context clues. Come on, guys. And then, of course, we have the OG Avengers are still alive, and they come back to Earth, and it's just, they're like, okay, we're going to get Thanos. It's great. And the first 20 minutes of the movie, they kill Thanos, and you're like, well, now what? There's still 2.5 hours left, and we get this 5-year time jump, which is crazy. And then we just kind of catch up with everyone. What's life the last 5 years? Tony had a kid, he's retired, obviously. Natasha is the leader of this sort of this Avenger team. That's Rocket, Nebula, Okoye, Rhodey, and Carol. I mean, there's just so much is going on. Oh, I didn't even talk about this. We open up the film with Clint and his family disappearing, and it's just one of those heartbreaking scenes where you turn around and then your whole family is gone in the blink of an eye. And again, that the cinematography of the opening scene is another scene that I would love to study, because craziness of a handheld shaky cam shot, because the whole point of those is to dive into the mentality of the character, they're spiraling, whatever. But that scene, great scene. Of course, Ant-Man returns from the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, and he figures out what's happened the last 5 years, and in a way he's our point of view character. We learn what happened to the world through his eyes, and then they reunite. They plan this time heist to use the quantum realm to time travel to these different points in times, create these branch realities, where they took the Infinity Stones to form their own gauntlet. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this, and not even including like what they originally wrote for some of these scenes and what they cut ultimately. The final battle is a splash page of comics. I mean, just hero versus villain, and you love it. And then that final, the portal scene, I think is just something that's just it's so iconic now. You just hear Sam on your left, which call back to Winter Soldier. Then you see T'Challa, Okoye, Shuri. They enter the chat. Sam, Wanda, the Ravengers, the Mystics of Karmatage, everybody, the Guardians, Spider-Man, like everyone shows up. Everyone unites with each other, and then you get that iconic line, Avengers assemble. Now, I got chills just talking. To this day, I want you guys to know, I saw this movie day one, and I went to the earliest showing possible to avoid spoilers. I want to tell you, I went to the movies at 7:45 in the morning to watch this film. Now, I didn't get the same theater experience as everyone, because in my theater there was like 20 people, and me and my friends were the only expressive, but still, just watching that film for the first time, I don't think I'll ever come close to I don't think I'll ever experience that again. I don't think anyone. It's just such an unforgettable experience, and again, you just had to be there. I saw that movie 4 or 5 times in the theaters, by the way. I mean, truth be told, I mean, there's just so much about this film. I mean, it's incredible. There's no other way to say it. It is incredible. And of course, this film ends with Tony doing the sacrifice play, which again is a callback to the original Avengers. And I think the saddest line in this film is when Pepper goes up to him and she says, "You can rest now." And that is a play on Tony's obsession with saving the world, putting that suit of armor around the world, and now that he has stopped the threat, Earth is safe, Pepper's safe, the universe has been restored, he can rest. And I think it's just one of the saddest things, truthfully, in any movie. And yes, I've seen The Notebook. Again, I can talk about this film for 3 more hours, but I won't keep you guys. I think you guys already know where I'm going to place these 2 films. Of course, I do think, technically speaking, I think Infinity War is better than Endgame, and I think it's just because of how it basically just reassembled the universe together. Than Endgame just kind of as a follow thread. But obviously, these films are Excelsior, and they are at the top of this list. Sorry, that's no. There we go. And that's it. I mean, that is the Infinity Saga incarnate right here, what you're looking at. I mean, everything here is purposeful. Obviously, there are some movies that don't really contribute to the Infinity Saga, but I think overall, this is my definitive ranking for me. My opinionated ranking definitively of the Infinity Saga and how these films fit together. Wow, what a long video this has been. Again, this is a new format I'm trying out, so I really hope you enjoyed this inaugural episode of Fandom Friendly. I hope you enjoyed this ranking, me talking about all of these different films. There was a lot to talk about in this video. Do you agree with my ranking so far? If not, please respectfully let me know in the comments below. But without wasting any more time, my name is Jorvik. I'll see you in the next one.